Hello students, I am here today in the TV studios of AIOU to help you understand the third unit of your course, Educational Psychology. In our last lecture, we discussed the concept of growth and development in children and adolescent in detail. Our today's lecture is a continuation of the same topic. We'll be discussing the social, moral, emotional forms of development in a human's early life. Let's begin this lecture by looking at the social development first. Social development involves learning the value, knowledge, and skills that enable children to relate to others effectively and to contribute in positive ways to family, school, and the community. This kind of learning is passed on to children directly by those who care for and teach them, as well as indirectly through social relationships within the family or with friends, and through children's participation in the culture around them. Through their relationships with others and their growing awareness of social values and expectations, children build a sense of who they are and of the social roles available to them. As children develop socially, they both respond to the influence around them and play an active part in shaping their relationships. What are the factors which are influencing children's social development? The people and the setting that are most closely involved with the children, family, school, and peers are shown at the center of the diagram. Through their daily contact with parents, family members, teachers, as well as with their peers, children learn about the social world and about the rules, practices, and values that support it. By actively participating in these relationships, children also affect the ways that adults and their peers relate to them. See this diagram. In addition, children's development is influenced by wider network of social support as represented in the diagram, including extended family, friends, and any community, culture, or religious group as child may be part of. These networks provide opportunities for children to develop their social awareness and skills as they relate with different people and experience a range of role and expectations. As shown in the outer circle in the diagram, children's lives are also shaped by the broader social circumstances that impact on their families and communities, such as access to social and health services, parents' employment and income, or their ability to balance work and family time. In particular, children's sense of social connection is often influenced by community attitudes and by cultural values, including those they encounter in the media. Through their relationship and connections with other, children build a sense of who they are and where they fit in the social world. Coming to an understanding about self and others is therefore a central goal of child's social development. These are the key points which you should remember. Children's earliest and the most extensive learning about social relationship occurs in the family. Parents and teachers can support positive social development when they model respect and consideration and encourage children to be similarly respect in all their relationships. To ensure children develop strong social skills, the following key points can come in as handy. Provide care and support by turning into children's need. Show you are willing to listen and take children's feeling into consideration. Help children to develop social skills by providing coaching and teaching them to think through and solve the day-to-day social difficulties they encounter. Supervise and support children's social activities without taking over. Ask questions that encourage children to put themselves in someone else's shoes. Questions like, how would you feel it? Help children learn skills for perspective taking. Ask questions in a sportive way helps children to think through situation and encourage them to take others' feeling and perspectives into account. Discuss moral issues with children and encourage them to state their opinions and reasons. Moving forward, we shall now discuss the development of morality in children. Dear students, have you ever wondered what is morality? Well, in simple terms, morality revolves around a person's differentiation of good and bad when it comes to intentions, thoughts, decisions, and actions. The development of morality involves learning to know the difference between right and wrong, which is necessary to make appropriate decisions in life. Childhood moral development is not genetic, but develops in stages. The development of morality is based on child's experiences and environment, as well as cognitive, social, and emotional development. In 1943, Robert Perk and Robert Havgust, two American psychologists, did some important research with a group of 120 children who were born in a small town in the Midwest of the United States in 1933 and who were still living there 10 years later. Their test included sentence completion and the interpretation of pictures showing ambiguous social situations. They also consulted the children's teachers and later they interviewed the children and got to know them well. They found 5 types of moral behavior. Amoral, when you seek only direct personal gratification. Expedient, when moral behavior occurs because you perceive some consequent advantage. Conforming, when all that matter is not to stand out from the crowd. Irrational conscientious, when you have accepted some moral code and stand by it, however absurd it may be, and rational altruistic, when you are concerned for the welfare of others and take proper measures to achieve it. Peck and Havgust thought that the first 2 types, amoral and expedient, were consecutive stages of development occurring in infancy and early childhood, while the next 2, conforming and irrational conscientious, were parallel stages appropriate in later childhood. Most adults, they believed, remain at one or the other of these 2 middle stages. The final type, rational altruistic, was rare. Apart from this one theory, there are several theories that speculate how and when morality develops in children. It is generally accepted, however, that children learn morality from those closest to them and are not born with a specific set of norms and values. Parents and teachers can help build strong moral values in their children by making sure they feel important and loved. This motivates a child to act in a way that will gain approval. Acknowledge and identify children's emotions from an early age to help them learn how to identify these feelings in others and to learn to emphasize as a result. Most importantly, give praise when your child acts in a positive manner and demonstrate the kind of moral behavior and values you expect from him or her. Along with the social and moral development, every child progresses through phases of emotional development as well. Let's now try to understand the development of emotions in children. Emotional development is the emergence of child's experience, expression, understanding, and regulation of emotions from birth through late adolescence. It also comprises how growth and changes in these processes concerning emotions occur. Emotional development does not occur in isolation. Neural, cognitive, and behavioral development interact with the emotional development, and social and cultural influences and contexts also play a role. Debate continues as to exactly when emotions appear in infant. For example, smiles occur early, but the earliest ones are more likely reflexive than social. A smile may express emotion as early as 6 weeks of age, but it is not until about age 6 months that a smile can be considered more emotional and social in nature. Crying is a powerful emotion for infants and may be used as a communication tool. Distress, pleasure, anger, fear, and interest are among the earliest emotions that infants express. By toddlerhood and early childhood, children begin to develop more of a sense of self. Emotions such as pride, shame, and self-recognition begins to emerge. These developments are facilitated partly by the rapid maturation of a toddler's frontal lobes and limbic circuit in the brain. These emotional developments lead to the strong sense of independence and defiance that often characterize the toddler's year. Preschooling begin to understand the rules of family, school, and society concerning how they express some of their emotions. They also can recognize nonverbal cues of emotion from one another. Preschool begin to distinguish between negative emotions such as sadness, anger, and fear. Although these young children have empathy, their knowledge of others' feelings generally is limited to people and situations with which they are familiar. As children move into later childhood, they learn the rules of displaying emotion, which is a form of social and emotional development. For example, if children have been taught to do so, they may, out of politeness or respect, be able to avoid showing disappointment in a gift or the failure of an adult to fulfill a promise. As they understand the emotional states of those around them, children realize that these states are not as simple as they might have once imagined. Let's now look at how these different kinds of development affect an individual during his or her adolescence. Adolescence is a socially constructed concept. In pre-industrial society, children were considered adults when they reached physical maturity. However, today we have an extended time between childhood and adulthood, known as adolescence. Adolescence is the period of development that begins at puberty and ends at emerging adulthood. The typical age range is from 12 to 18 years, and at this stage of development has some predictable physical milestones. Puberty is the period of several years in which rapid physical growth and psychological changes occur, culminating in sexual maturity. The onset of puberty typically occurs at age 10 or 11 for female and at age 11 or 12 for male. Females usually complete puberty by age 15 to 17, while males usually finish around ages 16 to 17. Females tend to attain reproductive maturity about 4 years after the first physical change of puberty appear. Males, however, accelerate more slowly but continue to grow for about 6 years after the first visible pubertal changes, while the sequence of physical changes in puberty is predictable. The onset and pace of puberty vary widely. Every person's individual timetable for puberty is different and is primarily influenced by heredity. However, environmental factors such as diet and exercise also exert some influence. Puberty involves distinctive psychological changes in the individual height, weight, body composition, and circulatory and respiratory systems. During this time, both the adrenal glands and the sex glands mature. These changes are largely influenced by hormonal activity. Hormones play an organizational role, readying the body to behave in a certain way once puberty begins. During puberty, the adolescent's hormonal balance shifts strongly toward an adult state. The process is triggered by the pituitary gland, which secretes a surge of hormonal agents into the bloodstream and initiate a chain reaction. What is physical growth? The adolescent growth spurt is a rapid increase in an individual's height and weight during puberty, resulting from the simultaneous release of growth hormones, thyroid hormones, and androgens. Males experiences their growth spurt about 2 years later than females. The accelerated growth is at different body parts, happens at different times, but for all adolescent, it has a very regular sequence. The first place to grow are the extremities, the head, hand, and feet, followed by the arms and legs, later the torso and shoulder. This non-uniform growth is one reason why an adolescent body may seem out of proportion. During puberty, bones become harder and more brittle. What is brain development? The adolescent brain also remains under development during this time. Adolescents often engage in increased risk-taking behaviors and experience heightened emotions during puberty. This may be due to the fact that the frontal lobes of their brains, which are responsible for judgment, impulse control, and planning, are still maturing until early adulthood.
When we think about changes that happen during puberty, we usually think about changes that happen to the body. Things like the development of secondary sex characteristics, or changes in height, or an increase in body hair. But those aren't the only changes that happen. There are actually a lot of changes that happen to the brain as well. And here I have an image of a brain, and this is what you would see if you looked at the side of the brain. So here is the front towards the face, here's the back, and then over here I have another brain, and this brain is sliced in half. So this brain is sliced right down the middle. And these two brains are facing each other, so here's the front, and then here's the back of this one. And one of the major changes that we see during adolescence is the development of the frontal lobe, particularly the prefrontal cortex. And I'll roughly indicate where on the brain that is. And this is the area of the brain that is responsible for what scientists call higher order cognition. Things like thinking about the future and planning and decision making. And also the ability to inhibit certain behaviors and focus on long-term goals. And this part of the brain doesn't really stop maturing until our early 20s. And because it is still developing during the teenage years, because it isn't fully developed, this might help to explain why teenagers sometimes show poor judgment. Another area of the brain that continues to develop during adolescence is the limbic system. And this includes a number of different brain structures. And this image isn't really the best way to view them because a lot of the structures are on either side of the midline. Even so, I want to point out about where they are in the brain. And one structure included in the limbic system is the amygdala, which would be about here. And this is the part of our brain that's responsible for emotions and emotional responses. And it also includes the hypothalamus, which is here, and let me pick a slightly different color for that. And this part of the brain regulates a surprising number of things. But in particular, I want to focus on its role concerning the endocrine system, or the hormone system in our bodies. And to be clear, the limbic system includes a bunch of other structures as well, but I really want to focus on these two. Because in combination with the prefrontal cortex, which helps to regulate our emotions, the fact that these structures are still developing during the teenage years might help to explain why teenagers can sometimes be moody, why they might sometimes have emotional outbursts, like yelling at their parents and stomping out of their room and slamming the door. And while I think that this is kind of funny, and while it kind of makes me want to roll my eyes when teenagers act out, this does actually have some really important legal implications. Like whether or not we should be able to charge teenagers like adults when they commit certain crimes. And this is a question that I put to you. Should teenagers get the same treatment as adults if they commit the same crimes? Should they be able to be sentenced to death or to life in prison for acts that they commit prior to turning 18? Do you think that this is a good boundary? Are crimes committed 1 month before someone's 18th birthday really different from crimes that they commit 1 month after? Where should this boundary be? How should we define adulthood? And these are really difficult and serious questions. And it's really not clear what role developmental research has in solving these problems, or if it should even have a role at all. Putting that very serious question aside, another area of the brain that changes during adolescence is the corpus callosum, which you can see here. And this is the area of the brain that connects our left and right hemispheres. And there are a number of things that change about this structure during adolescence. But in particular, I really want to focus on the changes to connections that are associated with language and language learning. And these connections grow before and during puberty, but this growth stops soon afterwards. And this might help to explain why learning a second language is so much easier in childhood as compared to adulthood. So we see changes to those specific brain areas, but there are also other, more global changes that are happening in the brain during this period, or changes that are happening throughout the brain. And one thing that we see during this period is an increase in myelination, especially in the areas that are associated with higher order functioning. And to quickly review, this is a neuron, and neurons communicate with each other by sending signals down these long axons. And myelin is a fatty tissue that covers the axons of neurons and helps to increase the speed at which the neurons can communicate. And faster communication between neurons means faster communication between brain areas. And this can help explain why adolescents are able to process information faster than children. Another thing that we see during this time period is that there's an increase in brain volume during early adolescence, and then this shrinks during late adolescence. And this suggests that adolescence is a period of synaptic pruning, or cutting weak connections in the brain. So this is your body literally breaking down connections between neurons. And you might initially think that this is a bad thing, but this pruning is actually really good and it's really important, because it allows the body to focus energy and resources on the connections that are used most. And a kind of scary implication of this is that what we do during our teenage years might be literally shaping our brains for the rest of our lives. That there's kind of a use it or lose it principle at work here. So if we spend our free time reading or playing sports or focusing on academics and having good time management skills, then that's what's going to be reinforced. The parts of the brain that are responsible for those behaviors are physically going to be strengthened. But if we spend most of our time watching TV and sitting on our couch and procrastinating, that's what's going to be strengthened instead.
Dear students, I hope you have understood the concept of growth and development in children and what are the factors which are affecting their growth and development. Until next time, it's goodbye from the TV studio of AIOU.